For generations, people have passed down tales of strange and eerie supernatural creatures. Among these species, some have never been named or described in detail, yet still strike fear when told. 2,000 years ago, during the rule of the legendary King Arthur, a battle for the throne erupted in the kingdom of Camelot. This led to the resurrection of an ancient ritual sacrifice among the Britons, offerings of living maidens to the gods of the rivers, seas, and mountains, even to demonic spirits of the earth, in hopes of peace. Before Merlin arrived to banish the evil creatures, such practices thrived to protect communities, and so the wraiths were born. The accidental wraith-making ritual of the Britons involved sacrificing an unspoiled virgin girl. Her throat was cut, and a bellows-like bag inserted so she could not speak or feel pain, only barely breathe as blood trickled while waiting for the river or mountain god, the Wraith, to take and consume her, sparing the villagers. After death, these wronged girls lingered as vengeful spirits, haunting riversides, springs, and cliffs, forlorn and mournful. The Hall family owned expansive forests, yet remained the poorest in the village. For years, Jacob Hall persevered at the taxing work of foresting, unwilling to change trades despite poverty, too dedicated to the life of the woods. Perhaps this explained why his household never improved. Jacob had one much younger brother named Edward, only a decade between them. Outside observers mistook the two for nephew and uncle. After studying in the city these last years, Edward did bookkeeping for a printing press and was said to be rather skilled. Still, he could not offer Jacob much financial help, as he was destitute himself. Jacob and his wife Anne had one beloved daughter, Lucy. 4 years Edward's junior, Lucy was far more childish. Now nearing the end of school, she struggled to find a favorite occupation. Lucy adored singing, but Jacob had never permitted her to pursue it, possibly why her studies increasingly suffered, as she discovered her passion for music was all-consuming. She would accept anything to be able to sing, but her family's expectations always conflicted with her dreams. Having earned some reputation in the city after working there for years, Edward was not wealthy but got by adequately. Visiting and seeing his niece fervently drawn to singing, while his brother reacted harshly, Edward only dared to discreetly gift the girl music theory books, sheet music, without Jacob knowing. Anne knew but did not intervene, only warning Edward to take care lest Jacob's temper cause Lucy grief. To Jacob, the performing arts could never lead to good. There was a saying that singing was a thankless profession. Historically condemned, singing and acting disreputable, this antiquated belief was deeply ingrained in Jacob, impossible to shake off. The drone of cicadas persisted all day in the scorching heat. Lucy busied herself roasting potatoes in the fireplace. The smoky, acrid smell of charred skins mixed with the sweet, delicious scent of the golden potatoes made her lick her lips. Just as she waited for the potatoes to finish cooking, Lucy suddenly heard Anne calling, "Lucy, go up the hill and fetch your father, dear. Your Uncle Edward's come up from New York City to visit." A commotion of voices came from the house above. To hear Uncle Edward had arrived, Lucy leapt up in delight and rushed breathlessly to the house. "Uncle Edward's here. Did you bring me a gift, Uncle? The harmonica?" Before Lucy stood a bright-faced young man in his late 20s, smiling as she ran up. Standing before Edward now, Lucy felt him ruffle her hair affectionately and say, "All grown up now, not still so little. You're only 4 years younger than me. When you come of age and move to the city, plenty more interesting things await. Why remain so fixated on the harmonica?" "If your father knew I brought you one, he'd scold me again." Lucy brushed his hand aside and insisted firmly, "I must have a harmonica to concentrate on studying, to test well, and attend university in the city. Father won't let me study music, so I'm learning discreetly. Then once I'm famous and wealthy, I'll build him a house and buy him cars, and he won't be able to criticize me anymore." Edward clicked his tongue disapprovingly, then pulled out a gleaming new harmonica from his shirt pocket. "Here, brand new. Just don't use it as an excuse to slack off now. Focus on studying well. Then someday make your way to the city and do as you will." Lucy barely stopped her eyes from bulging in delight, nodded quickly, then snatched the harmonica from Edward's hand and dashed off. Watching Lucy disappear, Edward shook his head and marveled to Anne. "This girl will be a handful when she's older. So stubborn nothing stops her, insisting I get her that harmonica. She's set on studying music, difficult to intervene now." Anne smiled wryly. "She only pesters you. Usually being poor here, she'd never dare ask for anything. Even with the rice harvested and sold this season, I thought to buy her new clothes like her friends, but she made me return them. She has a willful spirit indeed." Edward nodded, sitting down to drink the thick sugarcane juice Anne had poured earlier. He then asked, "So in the future, when Lucy comes to the city, have you considered what she should study?" Anne shook her head. "It's so frustrating, Uncle. Nowadays, every field is hard to find work in. Only farming in our village. My ignorant husband and I can't think of anything good. Fortunately, you work in the city, quick-witted. Please help us decide what would suit Lucy best." Edward paused in thought for a moment, deliberating back and forth before finally speaking. "The girl is too obsessed with music, and those schools now lead to unstable, precarious careers. But she's stubborn and won't give it up. So I advise hiding it from Jacob and letting her study economics like me. I'll provide support. Don't let him know or he won't let her move to the city, poor girl." Anne nodded vigorously in thanks, tears of gratitude mixing with her words, helpless to fulfill the girl's dreams. Edward then casually asked, "So when does Jacob usually return from the woods?" "He comes back for meals, but today with you visiting, Lucy's gone to fetch him, so he'll definitely be back soon. He's planting saplings just outside the forest edge today." Anne replied instantly. She had barely finished speaking when Jacob's steady voice sounded from the gate. "Brother Edward's come to visit, eh?" Edward smiled brightly. "Yes, I had some documents to process in town, so dropped by to see you all in passing." Jacob entered the house, placing his conical hat under the table. He used a towel to wipe the sweat drenching his face and neck. Then he downed a cup of tea in big gulps with loud slurping. Looking at Edward, he emphasized, "Have you gone home yet to burn incense at our parents' graves?" Edward nodded. "I just came from the cemetery before heading here, also wanting to ask you a favor." Jacob looked surprised. "You need me to help you? Barefoot and crude as I am, what can I do? My mind is slow too." Edward clicked his tongue. "You're just politely trying to refuse me again. But I must ask you this time. It won't work without your help. And I don't mean to beg help for nothing. The company will pay you well, very generous, up to several million." Jacob's eyes widened as he asked, "That much money? What kind of work pays so well?" Edward spoke solemnly. "You know the Bat Cave deep in the woods here, right? Some foreign scientists are coming to explore it but don't know the way. I stumbled on it a few times as a child but can't remember now. Wandering lost, never intentionally going inside," Jacob asked carefully. "You mean the Bat Cave in the forest?" Edward nodded. "Yes, that's the one." Jacob closed his eyes to ponder for a moment before opening them to say, "No one dares enter that cave now. Many have gone missing in the woods near it these last months. Even the village patrols sent to search never returned." Edward said, "This time it's a large group expedition, not individuals. They've hired security guards too. The disappearances were likely kidnappings, nothing strange. Strength in numbers will deter criminals." Jacob nodded. "All right then. With guards, I'm not worried. I had to search for you hiding in that cave a few times as a boy, so still remember it well. Fortunately, I sweet-talked you out or father would have whipped you more." Edward laughed. "As a foolish child, I just blindly followed Fook and Dat wherever they ran into the woods, closing my eyes and somehow always ending up there. Never could I find it intentionally with eyes open like that. Funny how it goes." Jacob nodded thoughtfully, then asked, "So when are they arriving? You won't leave immediately, right?" Edward shook his head. "I'll stay until it's done before returning to the city. The team comes tomorrow. Some may already arrive tonight to prepare. We can discuss the plan then. I need to book hotel rooms in town for them to rest. If you're free tonight, come with me to meet and negotiate. Your smooth talking may earn you extra rewards. Money for saplings. Jacob slapped his thigh excitedly. Of course, my cityfied brother lending me prestige. Soon the whole village will gawk as I buy rubber trees to blanket the bare hills. Then in no time I'll build a house and buy cars, maybe even afford vacations. Edward nodded. Keep dreaming. But first help me prepare a coherent story. City folk are cunning. One grandiose lie, and they'll poke holes right through you. Can't hide anything. He cautioned, so I advise not exaggerating too much. Just enough believability, and I'll fill in the gaps. Jacob eagerly nodded in agreement. After chatting a while longer, Edward left. Jacob went to the back garden to pack some supplies and fertilizer for the saplings. Waiting until evening, Edward called to update. Hurry to the village entrance, there's a car waiting. The provincial team is here already. They want to meet you and ask questions. Thrilled, Jacob abandoned the saplings and sprinted straight to the village hall. Arriving, he saw the village chief heartily laughing and shaking hands with a blue-eyed foreigner. As Jacob reached the gate, someone rushed out urging, "Mr. Hall, come in quickly. The chief is singing your praises non-stop. Make the papers this time and put in a few good words for our village. These people are doing something huge here, even television coverage." A man in his early 20s, one of the hall guards named Keo, grabbed Jacob's arm. The talkative youth stuck to Jacob, hoping to ride his coattails. Jacob curled his lip disdainfully, recalling how apathetic these guards had been when he applied for reforestation subsidies, only swarming for honey now that he had some acclaim. How pathetic. Jacob walked into the yard and a middle-aged man held out his hand, wanting to shake in greeting. Though confused, Jacob shook hands, and after a moment the man introduced himself. "I'm Dr. John Wilson, doctorate in geology. Very nice to meet you." Jacob's eyes widened in awe. Good gracious, to meet a real-life doctorate. What fortune across 10 generations. Dr. Wilson looked flattered but quickly changed the subject. "I'm just passing through for now, but would like you to join us for dinner in town. I have some questions for you tonight, if convenient," Jacob stammered. Of course convenient. I'm free all day. Just feeding pigs and digging soil in the woods. Don't worry, doctor. Lead the way." Dr. Wilson nodded. "All right then." After greeting the village staff, Dr. Wilson hurried Jacob into the car to return to the county seat. Back in town, Dr. Wilson brought Jacob to a hotel room. Inside, 4 others already sat waiting as if informed ahead of time. Seeing Jacob enter, they nodded and smiled perfunctorily in greeting. Dr. Wilson introduced each member of the expedition before looking to Jacob to explain. "This time our relic investigation team has international sponsorship to explore ancient caves in the province. But traversing your village's dense pine forest is near impossible without a local guide." Dr. Wilson paused, then stepped to an intricate map. Pointing, he continued. "Based on our historical research and deductions by the nation's top scholars, we've concluded there is a cave here, harboring relics dating back 2,500 years to the Hong Bang dynasty. We suspect it hides mysteries of the legendary ancient Koa Dao script, also called fire letters." Hearing this, Jacob's jaw dropped. After a stunned moment, he slowly said, "That tiny bat cave has so many secrets. I don't know, as kids we just played inside. Even peed all over but didn't see anything. Not even..." Jacob was elaborating when a sudden "Him!" cut him off. Glancing back, he realized it came from Edward, sitting behind one of the 3 interrogators, unnoticed until now. Catching his meaning, Jacob dared not improvise further. Dr. Wilson quickly continued, "You just don't know. Ancients had many mysteries. Though only a small cave, thousands of years ago it could have been a large shelter. Time eroded it down to this size. Many clues point to this cave, so we must test the hypothesis directly. Can't just judge the surface. Thorough analysis from all angles is needed." Edward now stood and applauded. Comrade Wilson is completely right. Can't rely on intuition. This proactive professional attitude is what we all must learn from him. The room applauded and laughed brightly. Dr. Wilson was delighted, feeling elevated to cloud 9, too elated for words. After a dazed moment, Dr. Wilson regained composure and arranged the room. If preparations are ready, let's eat then rest. We set out tomorrow morning. He turned to Jacob. For now, please stay here one night. Follow Edward for briefing and to plan an optimal route to maximize our time. Dr. Wilson then left the room, the others gradually filing out after him. Only Edward and Jacob remained. Edward looked at Jacob and whispered, "I told you not to prattle meaninglessly. Fortunately, I stopped you in time, else you would have ruined everything." Jacob smiled apologetically, scratching his head. "I just say whatever comes to mind. Thankfully, you reminded me, or I would have told how we peed everywhere with Dat and Fook." Edward leaned in and whispered, "Let me tell you, one of those people is your future daughter-in-law. If not for me, then for my face. Can't say just anything." Jacob nodded sagely. "From now on, I'll be careful. Though they did introduce themselves earlier, and I forgot." He asked eagerly, "How much are we earning for this job?" Edward raved, slapping the table. 10 million! Buy all the saplings you want. In 10 years, a whole forest bearing your name." Jacob was speechless. Edward patted his shoulder, then left. Jacob followed Edward for a quick meal, then slept, resting up to guide the expedition into the woods tomorrow. The next morning, a convoy of vehicles from town rumbled down to the village. Generators, lamps, tables, chairs, everything imaginable loaded up. Seeing so many cars arrive, the villagers clapped and cheered excitedly. Stopping at the forest edge, from here no vehicles could proceed further. The path narrowed to barely fit a small motorcycle. Heavy items were loaded onto motorbikes to carry in, the rest hand-carried. The forest edge marked the intersection of civilization and wilderness. Crossing it meant entering a wholly different world. As the group prepared to enter the winding jungle trail, Jacob suddenly heard Lucy calling out. She came running swiftly from the field by the edge all the way to the border. Jacob was stunned. By the time he turned, Lucy already stood before him. He barked, "Why'd you follow me here? Go home and chop vines for the pigs." Lucy stroked her hair pitifully, pleading, "I want to join you all in the woods. So many interesting things. Studying has been stressful. I need a break to clear my head." As Jacob readied to refuse, Edward interjected, "Too much pressure isn't good. I think letting her come along is fine. The bat cave will only take a morning, not too much time wasted." With Edward already permitting, Jacob couldn't decline. He glared at Lucy, warning, "Uncle said you can come, but no fooling around or wandering off. Any nonsense and I'm sending you straight home." Lucy's eyes widened as she nodded eagerly. Then she stealthily pulled out the harmonica Edward had gifted her and blew a few hollow notes, keeping it hidden from Jacob's sight. Walking behind, Edward saw this and laughed. Snatching the harmonica from Lucy's hands, he said, "Let me demonstrate. You should practice following the group today. Once I return to the city, I won't be here to teach you. Don't mess up what I showed already." He then played a lively tune, the soft music echoing through the quiet woods and lifting their spirits. Lucy listened intently, occasionally cheering in delight. All along the deep forest trail, she practiced the song Edward taught, producing only disjointed wheezes despite effort. Seeing this, Edward encouraged, "It takes at least a month's practice to smoothly play a tune. Expecting mastery in a day is impossible." Hearing this, Lucy felt slightly less disheartened, now trying even harder. Edward's group trekked over 30 kilometers into the woods. The difficult terrain meant traveling from dawn until dusk to arrive. Before reaching the Batcave, as Jacob described, they had to stop and rest beside a small brook after the long day's hiking. They paused to splash brook water on their faces for refreshment before proceeding into the cave. Set deep in a rocky crevice, the Batcave exuded an eerie chill as the wind howled. About a meter wide and perfectly round, from outside it appeared minuscule, but who could guess what secrets it truly harbored inside? Dr. Wilson suddenly approached Jacob and asked, "After this brook comes the Bat Cave, correct?" Jacob immediately answered, "That's right, it's only 100 meters from the brook. As kids, I would grab Edward there and..." Realizing he was oversharing again, Jacob abruptly stopped mid-sentence. Too late. Scattered chuckles rang out from the group. Scanning the source of laughter, Jacob saw it was the pretty young woman standing right next to Edward. He now recalled she had been in the hotel room that first day too. Thinking back, Jacob was certain this must be the daughter-in-law Edward had mentioned. Glancing at Edward only earned another annoyed glare. Nothing said. Dr. Wilson just nodded without comment. After letting everyone rest comfortably for 30 more minutes, he ordered them onward again. The brook before them flowed rapidly but wasn't too deep. Moving carefully, the group finally crossed over, though many slipped on the mossy rocks, yelling out in surprise and pain. A rocky crevice emerged 100 meters past the brook. Deep inside loomed a pitch-black cavernous cave. Dr. Wilson urged them straight into its depths without a word. The first to enter were Edward, Dr. Wilson, and Jacob, the expedition leaders.